Welcome everyone to what I'm sure is going to be a fabulous start to the second edition of the Remote Workforce Summit organized by College Times. And for our very first session, we of course want to address the most important and most pertinent topic. What is the future of remote working? To talk about this, we have Mr. Abhinav Singhal, the Chief Strategy Officer, APAC of ThyssenKrupp. Abhinav is actively involved in leading digitization initiatives for the group and is also the founder and board member of ThyssenKrupp Innovations, a venture responsible for incubating new digital solutions for the industrial sector in Asia Pacific. He has significant experience in leading digital transformation programs and has worked with McKinsey and Dell. Abhinav is passionate about building digital skills and is a member of World Economic Forum, Asian Task Force, and senior advisor at Forbes Ignite. Abhinav has been recognized as one of the top 50 global thought leaders and influencers on future of work and digital transformation by Thinkers 360 and conferred Asian CIO 50 award last year. So Abhinav is here to talk about a holistic view of remote working strategy. So without further ado, let's call Mr. Abhinav Singhal. Abhinav, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mitsu, for that kind introduction. Let me start off by putting the obvious out there. If you reflect on the past 12 months, I'm sure everyone agrees that the COVID crisis had led to an acceleration in remote working. All of us were forced to work from home. There was no other option during the circuit breaker lockdowns. And we have seen a wave of announcement from companies all over the world saying that the future of work is remote. In fact, we have around 15 to 20% of global companies going 100% remote going forward. And you see some names on the right, like Atlassian, Coinbase, Dropbox. But if you're honest to ourselves, there is also a counter view which says that remote working also had its own challenges. For example, it led to less team cohesion and lack of direction in case of few employees. There was challenges in communicating effectively with your teams. And a lot of times people had to understand and learn new technology and tools which are efficient to make remote working possible. If I take example of this event, right, it's possible because of remote working. We are all joining, most of us at least virtually, and it gives us an opportunity to get thought leaders from all over the world to have in one session. So that's the benefit of remote working. But at the same time, as a speaker, it also doesn't give me the opportunity to really know my audience, to understand your behavior, your reactions as I'm presenting, and tailor my style. So there is no one perfect cookie cutter approach to remote working. There is a balanced view. There are some advantages, there are some disadvantages. And at ThyssenKrupp, when we went through this journey and asked this question for ourselves, what should be our remote working strategy? We came down to these 5 elements. We said if we have to define our future of remote working, possibly these are some of the questions we need to answer. The first question being, what tasks and activities are best suited for remote work? Because as we just said, not every task makes sense to be done virtually or remotely. Once we have identified that, then the second step is, how do I now decide on the right working model? So what should be my office structure? Do I need to have virtual offices, flex spaces? How should I organize employees coming into office on a daily basis? That's the second step. Once you've answered these two mid to long term strategic questions, then we come to enablers. What practices and behaviors do I need? What interventions do I need to support the employees so that they can really be efficient and effective in working remotely? And what tools and technologies do I need to provide them to make this a good and easy experience? The last and the most important element, which we see a lot of companies missing, is then how do I create a omni-channel experience, which means that if an employee is coming to office or working remotely, it's a seamless transition. There is no big difference in either virtual work or physical work. And if you can nail that element down, then these 5 elements can actually help you define a very comprehensive future of remote working strategy. Now let's go a bit detail into some of these elements. Let's start with role assessment. As we discussed, remote work offers several advantages, right? So it helps you get more flexibility to the employees. You get more speed because employees don't need to really spend time in travel and transit. It also makes a case for diversity because you can have people joining from multiple locations, multiple time zones, and people who need to be at home for certain reasons. For example, parents, caregivers, they also have an equal opportunity to be employed and contribute at work. And finally, it can lead to site agnostic talent. You can hire people all over the world, and you can also roll down your real estate costs. So these are some of the obvious advantages which remote working offers. And we have seen over the last 12 months, a lot of companies building and capitalizing on these gains. But at the same time, as you start working remotely, you also realize that there is less work separation, right? All of us have experienced that. It's hard to differentiate when we are working and when we are spending time with our family. Those boundaries are actually diminishing. There is a lack of belonging to the organization because more or less you're working on your own. There is less uh, and at times challenge collaboration between employees. And there's a lot of concerns around mental health because you don't have colleagues to talk to and share in a remote setup. You're pretty much all over on your own. So when you think about roles, not each and every role makes sense to be done remotely. In fact, McKinsey did an assessment last year to look at the activities we typically carry out and work. And they categorize them into three buckets: activities which are high propensity for remote working, activities which are medium suited, and activities which are low suited. So, for example, if you look at the high category, updating knowledge and learning, that is something you can do easily remotely. If you have to do an online seminar, rather than going to office, you can do it out of home. Makes sense. Or doing tasks which requires a lot of interaction with computers. For example, creating a document, doing an analysis. You can either do it remotely at home or in office, doesn't really change a lot. But on the extreme side, when you look at activities which are low suited, for example, measuring products or surroundings, assisting and caring for others, doing managing physical equipments and machineries, these are some activities which are better suited to be done in person. And then there are some in the middle which are highlighted with this orange box. For example, communicating and establishing relationships, or training and teaching, where you see the black dots, which shows that the real limit of remote working is lesser than the blue dots, which is the potential. So, for example, you can conceptually do 50% of training and teaching remotely, but in reality, only 10% is really effective because students do benefit with an in-person interaction, and they do tend to learn more, ask more questions when they are present together in a physical classroom. So the main message is not all activities are equally suited as you think about remote work. And here are some examples of tasks which are much better done in person because you need to establish real trust and establish a genuine, authentic relationship between people. For example, when you're doing negotiations, when you want to build a trust based relationship, onboarding of employees. This is a widely debated topic where a lot of companies have come up with packages to remotely onboard employees, but employees who have had lack of experience in that sector have really struggled to form the right network and relationships and be really effective in what they're doing. Similarly, making some critical decisions, problem solving, these are some tasks which are better done in person. And what this means is that as you think about your organization and think about the roles, for example, which you have across different functions, there is a merit in assessing these roles and trying to figure out what is the right share of remote work. So, to give you an example, on the left hand side, this is another assessment done by McKinsey, which says that for finance and insurance sectors, management sectors, you can have up to two-thirds of tasks and activities done remotely, versus at the bottom, if you look at agriculture or construction sectors, only 10 to 15% of the roles can be done remotely. So similarly, we did this analysis for our organization, and there are two parts to it: a top-down assessment looking at different roles and trying to assess what is the right share of remote work in them, and then also doing a bottom-up feedback from the employees, asking them, what is your preference? How many days would you like to come to office? Would you like to have a 100% remote arrangement? And the answer lies somewhere in the middle. So to round this element up, our experience is 100% remote work might work, but only for very certain specific roles and tasks. In reality, hybrid is the answer. The answer is somewhere in between physical and remote, because each and every role has few tasks which makes more sense, which are more effective when you done in which when you carry them out in person. And on the right hand side, you see some examples that depending on the sectors in different countries, so more developed countries have a higher propensity for remote work versus developing countries have a higher propensity for physical work based on the sectors which are dominant in those economies. So once you have done that assessment, when you've looked at your company and understood what tasks and roles make sense to be done remotely, the next question is now how do I create and translate into the office working model? So again, on this left hand side, you can see a spectrum of activities almost entirely on premise or at office versus or entirely off premise, which is remotely. And as I said, the answer is somewhere in hybrid in the middle. So depending on your organization, you can choose again multiple models. Should I have one central large headquarter office and then let everybody work from home? Or should I have multiple hubs and no big headquarter office and use them as remote working centers? Or should I have micro hubs? Or maybe have no formal permanent office space, just use collaborative working spaces and have our employees based on there. So depending on your ability to access talent and the cost and budget targets you have, you can choose between one of these office layout models to put down the blueprints on how should this remote working translate for your organization. And then on the right hand side, you can choose whether you want to call your employees alternating on sites on alternate days, weeks, or do you want to have them going on designated days, or do you want to just let them reside within a certain distance of office and enable them once a month or on specific days to come to office. So there are a lot of degrees of freedom you can play with. There is no perfect answer, but this is the options which are available to you. And depending on how many tasks, how many roles you want to carry out remotely, you can choose one of these archetypes. To give our example, at ThyssenKrupp, we decided to continue sticking to a hybrid model where we continue to have a large headquarter, we have our regional and in-country offices, but then we moved to on-site, on-demand work for most of our management cadres, and for our frontline operators, we had more and less an alternating arrangement on alternative shifts, alternative days. That works best depending on our configuration. And of course, this can then translate into savings both on rental cost, on facilities, but also sometimes overlooked on furniture and depreciation, utility costs, cleaning and maintenance costs. Typically, in our experience, you can realize at least 20 to 30% savings on your current costs by moving to the right hybrid remote working model. Now, once you have done this, you have defined what roles and tasks can be done remotely. You have defined what is the right blueprint for your office layout and office infrastructure. You have realized some savings. Then you have to go to the next level and think about enablers. How do I ensure now whatever hybrid model I have designed for the company, it really works effectively? How do I ensure what practices and behaviors do I need to follow to ensure maximum engagement of our employees? And here it again boils down to how enabling a genuine in-person conversation virtually. Ultimately, when you do remote work, a lot of times we realize that people miss the human connection. Most of the calls tend to get transactional. There is a fatigue of doing Zoom calls. So building in those checkpoints where you can talk to each other off work, understand in an open and honest manner what's going on in each other's life, how can you make the employee successful, what concerns and fears he or she might be having, how can you support them, that plays a very big role. And this becomes really critical in a remote working environment. So demonstrating vulnerability and empathy, asking people about their needs, and then building space for diverse perspectives. These are some of the practices which we realize are very, very critical as you think about remote working and making it successful. Similarly, we've seen a lot of fatigue on communication, right? Employees find it hard to switch off because you have VC calls, you have WhatsApps, you have social media chats, emails, round the clock flowing in when you're working from home. So again, there is a value in thinking about how do you want to use these communication channels. Typically, a one-on-one call works very well when you want to have individual catch-ups, talk about sensitive topics, versus if you want to update a status to a large group of people, you can just go follow an email on the other extreme. So there are multiple ways you can design these communication channels, and there is a value in thinking about what are the norms you want to lay down for your teams and decide when do you want to use a social media chat versus a VC versus a one-on-one call versus an email, and that can just help make the whole process more efficient and avoid the fatigue which a lot of people experience when they're working remotely. The next element is the more obvious one is as you think about working remotely, you also have to provide necessary toolkits to your employees, right? So now there are range of these technology tools, SaaS solutions available, but we realized that you need some form of content creation tools where you can do joint whiteboarding, problem solving. So for example, we used Mural and we found it quite effective to create workshops where you can have your sticky notes and you can do the brainstorming, prioritization like you would do in a physical environment. Then you need some sort of video conferencing solutions, file sharing solutions, communication tools, and then backlog management and culture building tools to conduct polls, get pulses from your employees. So again, depending on your context, you need to choose and define a set of tools which will be critical to make virtual work possible. And then you have to ensure that there are some sessions to educate people on how to use these tools. It can be very overwhelming for employees suddenly to get all these new tools provided by organization, and we have seen very little usage or compliance at times. So it's really important to put that extra effort on not just buying this tool but also educating people on how to use these tools and making, for example, champions of these tools within the organization who can be the go-to person where people can reach out and get access and get support if they need help. With tools, it's also important to think about security, an often overlooked topic. But as you provide more and more tools and access to data remotely, it becomes really critical to think about access controls, what information is available where, having protections regarding firewalls on tools to protect them from corporate internet, and practice it. Sometimes it just boils down to some simple commonsensical ground rules, as I've highlighted few on the right hand side, telling the employees to use approved tools only to collaborate, use only enterprise solutions and applications, using a secure Wi-Fi, VPN network, use screen protectors, for example, when you're working from a coffee shop or remotely, use only approving documents, file sharing tools, and encrypt stuff when you share. So these are very simple, commonsensical habits, but they become really critical to make remote working successful because as we go more and more virtual and remote, we also see a much higher risk on cybersecurity, on data protection than what you would have entailed in a physical setup. So, with these two enablers around thinking about the management practices and thinking about technology tools, ultimately, the last element which we feel is really important is bringing this all together. How do you create an omni-channel experience? Irrespective of what is the share of remote work which you decide for your organization, it is really important for employees to experience this in a seamless manner. Whether they are working from office or whether they are working virtually, if they have some of these elements sorted out, then that seamless omni-channel experience can go a long way in making remote working successful. To give you some examples, as you think about the physical office space and the virtual space, think about how can you build an element of agility in that, where you don't have formal structures, formal desks, but rather an activity-based working arrangement, which can be done remotely or physically, depending on the project the team is working on. How can you provide the right level of flexibility to the employees? There are some employees who prefer to work from home. There are some employees who prefer to come to office more. And if you can offer that flexibility and customize it, then you see the highest productivity and efficiency from that employee. Similarly, how can you create an environment for human and artificial intelligence to collaborate together? As you do more and more virtual tools, you also use AI solutions like RPA, chatbots, and here it is important for the workforce to be comfortable with these tools and seamlessly work and collaborate with them. The other element is about being purposeful and inspirational. How can you focus a bit more around mindfulness, energy of people, and not just focusing on work, but bringing in those right coffee breaks, coffee machines in a virtual setup, which can help them relax and re energize to be efficient and productive at their work? How do you build an element of sustainability? Physically, that could mean having more energy efficient workplaces, but virtually, it also means building in the right awareness on the carbon footprint of your tools and how can employees really benefit from a more sustainable and holistic view to the workplace. And finally, how can you make this whole experience more personalized and immersive? There's a lot of technology out there which we can leverage to create personalized content, engaging content, which can help enhance the training efficiency and effectiveness. And remote working or physical working, this remains a very core driver of employees' productivity and performance. So ultimately, to round it up, if you think about the future of remote work, in our experience, the future of remote work is actually hybrid. Having 100% remote or 100% physical work is not the answer. It's somewhere in between. And the defining element of that is what roles and tasks can be carried out remotely in the best manner. What does it translate into the office space? How can you have the right enablers on technology and on management practices? And finally, how can you make this a very inspiring and personalized experience for employees? If we keep these elements in mind, then I'm sure we can come up with the right strategy to define your future of remote working. So this is what I wanted to share with you as the opening keynote, but I'm happy to keep the conversation going. Take any questions you have. Feel free to reach out on social media or other channels, and I'll be happy to continue the conversation beyond this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you very much for defining very clearly the potential for remote work, along with the strategies and models for the ideal remote working situation. Kalish Times and all the attendees, thank you for taking the time and sharing your thoughts today. Thank you very much once again, and we appreciate you taking your time out.
Thank you, Mitri. It was a pleasure joining the event.
Thank you.